The Tom Woods Show, episode 2286.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, I don't know about you, but I am running into a lot of progressives saying, look, police, fire, schools, these are all great examples of socialism. Well, let's focus on that school example. I've got a free ebook called Education Without the State that makes a pretty darn good case for a stateless approach to education. Pick it up at nostateeducation.com. Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. We've got old friend Connor Boyack back with us on the show. He is the president and founder of the Libertas Institute. He's also the creative force. Now, I don't want to downplay the role of Elijah, your illustrator, but I think the Tuttle Twins children's book series was your idea. Am I right?
It kind of evolved between both of us, actually. Yeah.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah. He and I were each kind of having our own little thoughts and ideas, and it kind of meshed together into what became the Tuttle Twins.
Oh, I guess I just always assumed that you came up with it, and then you approached him and said, how would you like to illustrate it? I didn't realize there was synergy there.
No, actually, it was when I first met you at Freedom Fest in when was that? I'm trying to even remember.
Could have been
that would have been
10, 11.
Yeah, I think it was 11. And he and I shared a hotel room together. It was the first time he and I had met in person. We had kind of interacted online through the Ron Paul campaign and so forth. I met you, I met Elijah, and that was the beginning of our conversations together of like, hey, what if there was this idea? Or hey, what if? And so it was kind of a very collaborative thing.
Okay. Well, since then, you've sold millions of books. The idea behind the Tuttle Twins, I feel like when I introduce you, it's like I'm introducing people from the Free State Project. 98% of listeners already know, but I still have to say it. The Tuttle Twins book series takes classic works from our tradition of thought and conveys the ideas in them in a way that's engaging for younger people. And it fills a gap that I certainly perceived in my own case because I'm a father of children, but also because everybody would write to me and say, Woods, you've recommended a lot of books for adults. What about for younger audiences? And I would say, well, there isn't anything. Thanks for writing. But now there is because of what you've done. And then your American history work has been great. But today I want to talk about your book, Children of the Collective, which is a fairly recent release. And you're defying modern convention by having no subtitle. So there's that. Usually there's a long paragraph long subtitle after the title. So, but you do have a foreword by Glenn Beck, which is a nice thing for you. Extend your reach and get people to pay attention. I had a foreword by Ron Paul to my book Meltdown. And I think that was the thing that got a lot of people to take a chance on a book by somebody they had never heard of. So that's a great thing for you. But anyway, what do you mean by Children of the Collective? Let's start right there.
So this book is all about collectivists, how historically they've always gone after the kids, why they do it, and how they're doing it today. We all recognize that throughout history, totalitarian thugs have always tried to propagandize the rising generation. They've tried to maintain and grow their power by inculcating loyalty among the youth who don't have any reason to suspect any bad intentions on the part of these political rulers. And so we know this about history. We know that the world's worst totalitarian countries have done this. What we generally lack, especially as Americans, is any deep conception about this trend happening in our own day, what it looks like, how it's happening in real time. We very much benefit from hindsight being 2020 and so forth, but we struggle to understand who and what forces are operating today that are trying to go after our kids. And so the book really kind of breaks down the historical aspect of it, but then the modern aspect to say, here's what collectivists are up to, here's why they do it, and then more importantly, here's how within your family and then society at large, here's how you can push back against it.
You start off with, it's kind of, I guess, spread throughout, but reminding us of the place of the family in society and why it is that, let's say, especially ambitious or more to the point, sinister political authorities might want to interfere in it. And you can think of a laundry list of complaints that a revolutionary might have against the family. It's inegalitarian because not everybody has the same parents. So some people are born into more favorable or less favorable circumstances through no fault of their own. And so we're going to rectify that through various redistributive means. Or furthermore, the family is the incubator in which the ideas of the olden times, traditional ideas, are imparted to children. Now, not in all families, but nevertheless, the family is a conveyor of ideas and practices and worldviews that come from parents, grandparents, ancestors. And again, if you're a revolutionary, you want people to abandon those old-time ideas. So the idea that young people all the time are surrounded by people who are, in effect, indoctrinating them in what a revolutionary would consider reactionary ideas is a problem. So we want to do what we can to weaken this institution, to undermine parental authority, and so on like that. So talk about that a little bit, because I think for some people, it might be hard for them to accept this. They think that the state may be clumsy and maybe it taxes us too much, but you have to take the red pill, I think, to get to the next level and realize that the harms of the state go well beyond that.
They do. Here's a story perhaps to try and relate to this. I just got back last night from Sacramento. I was invited out by the Libertarian Party of California, gave a keynote speech at their annual convention, and their theme was disruption. So they asked me to speak on something connected to disruption. So I spent a while thinking, okay, what message could I bring a bunch of hardcore libertarians that they haven't heard a million times before talking about disruption? And I settled on this very idea, that being the state versus the family, that the greatest disruption we see in society comes from weakening and undermining the family. And that within our libertarian community, I think we too poorly recognize this trend. We are, by our very nature, extremely individualistic people, and we don't often prioritize and emphasize and focus on the family. So this book, in fact, Children of the Collective, the entire book is modeled after a single quote that I used in one of my past books. And when I referenced that quote, it's been in my head for years, ruminating until I said, this deserves a book-length treatment. It comes from Michael Novak, who, for your listeners that don't know, is a theologian, author, wrote like 40 books, very prolific guy. And the quote says this: between the omnipotent state and the naked individual looms the first line of resistance against totalitarianism, the economically and politically independent family, protecting the space within which free and independent individuals may receive the necessary years of nurture. So I took each of those little segments and turned them into different chapters to really go deep and say, okay, why is the family the first line of resistance? What does that mean to be the first line? Oh, and do we need a second line and a third line of resistance? And what does that look like in our society? What de Tocqueville called mediating institutions and civil society social fabric. Okay, what does it mean to be a naked individual? Well, we're naked physically, we're naked socially, we're naked spiritually, intellectually. Why is the state omnipotent? And really just spending time unpacking this, because the quote for me has been so profound in years past to say, this is exactly it. Our Tuttle Twins work for us has borne this out. The more that we help parents help their kids, the stronger their families become, the conversations they're having. We're strengthening their ability to keep their kids on a good intellectual and ideological path for years to come, despite being bombarded with crazy ideas and social media and all the rest. The more we can fortify families as these incubators of the individual, the better off those individuals are going to be. They're more protected they're going to be from all the false ideas and crazy stuff going around in our society. So for me, it really boils down to this fact that the family plays a central role. And within our libertarian community, we don't really emphasize that much. We speak very much to the individual, and rightly so. But the individual has to grow and start from somewhere. And that's the family. And that's why we wanted to elevate this discussion within our community to say, this is what matters. This matters a great deal. And especially if you look at the inverse relationship between the two institutions, as the state grows, the family is weak. As the family is weak, the state thrives because we can depend on it for childcare and elderly care and school and healthcare and everything else. But if we have strong families and then by extension, strong communities, the state is weak because fewer people need it. Its primary use case, the idea for which it exists as this social backstop or social safety net, is undermined because we're looking after our own, we're taking care of one another. And so that justification for the state to grow into and offer such largesse is diminished. So the family is this central role. We need to give it more focus, and that's one of the goals of the book.
As I read, I noticed, at least to my eye, that something was missing. And so I want to ask you about it.
Okay.
I think I read this pretty closely, and I don't see a whole lot in there about gender theory. And yet I feel like that is a pretty big attack on the family. It's dividing families. We've got school systems behaving in secretive ways, involving the indoctrination of children adopting different identities and concealing them from the parents. I think that's got to be addressed somewhere.
That's a very fair criticism, actually. And what I would maybe say in defense is that I was trying to look at like 1,000-year view throughout history to understand the bigger trends and what's been happening. I would say that this gender stuff is very new, very recent. Hopefully it'll be a passing fad, and within a few years we'll say like, how crazy that we were going through all this. That remains to be seen if there will be enough social backlash to all these forces. I will also perhaps say that I'm working on a separate book with Corey DeAngelis called Mediocrity, all about the 40 ways government schools are failing our kids. And that does receive a lot of attention there precisely because it's through the schools that so much of this gender ideology is being pushed onto kids. And so maybe also for that reason that I've kind of given it separate treatment in a forthcoming book. I didn't include it here, but I think that is a fair point. And I think a lot of parents feel under attack because they don't feel equipped and prepared to have these discussions with their kids and to help them appropriately defend their ideas or push back against what's happening. So I think that's a very fair point that needs some focus.
Well, along those lines, when you say that the kids are being indoctrinated and there's a collective they're somehow being indoctrinated into, what exactly is it? What propositions, in effect, are they being asked to accept?
Well, I'm working on volume 2 with Elijah of our history book right now. This covers the period of time 1776 to 1791. So it's the battles, the conventions, the discussions between the Federalists and the so-called anti-Federalists. And what strikes me, I mean, I've known this before, but really diving deep into this period of history, I come away with this idea that the history is written by the victors, that the narrative of the Federalists is what kids are being taught. It's what's in all the social studies books. And the anti-Federalists are painted as losers if they're even referenced at all. And so we've been trying to highlight and surface the arguments of the anti-Federalists who are like, hey, look, these guys' predictions were a bit more prescient than the Federalists in the sense that the Constitution would not substantively limit the government. So I bring this example up to answer your question in this way. I feel like the young children in government schools, public schools, are indoctrinated into a reverence for and trust in the state and the state's preferred narrative about its own identity and history. Think of the Pledge of Allegiance, millions of kids repeating this rote indoctrination written by a socialist, no less, Francis Bellamy, to express their loyalty, a concept they don't even really understand. And yet from a young age, this is being drilled into their minds. So too with the books and the curriculum and the social narratives, all built around this idea to instill in a young person's mind reverence for and a belief in the legitimacy of the state. And so if you go to the extreme and you look throughout history at the Lenins and Maos and Hitlers and all these guys, or even today in North Korea and Russia and elsewhere, then you get that icky feeling of like, oh, now they're going over the top. They're making it about a particular person. They're making it about the dear leader. They're making it about communism or the Communist Party. And we feel icky about that. But if you just dial that back by 10% and get rid of that icky factor, the substance is the same. Children are being exposed to a very singular method of thinking, all in support of the present ruling party and the state, the set of facts that the victors have been able to shape to their preferred narrative. And so maybe we don't have the icky factor here in America, yet we still very much have children who are not being exposed to these alternative ideas. I might call many of them truths that are inconvenient or unflattering to the ruling regime and to the status quo. So, I mean, that certainly guides a lot of our work with Tuttle Twins more broadly to say, let's expose kids to these other ideas that they're not being taught in schools. But for parents, really the message here in this book, Children of the Collective, is just to wake up and take that red pill, because I firmly believe, I think I even say this in the book, that we will lose every battle we don't know is being fought. Like if we don't realize that our children's minds are ground zero for an ideological war, then we're already letting them become a casualty. We're not giving them the right body armor, the right weaponry. We're not telling them who the enemy is, what the rules of engagement are, where to point and shoot. We're just sending them out into the world and assuming it'll all be okay. And they become a casualty. They come home and say, I love Bernie Sanders. And you're like, where did I go wrong? We got to realize that this is an ideological battlefield. I don't love using war terms to paint a dire picture, but I do feel like it is a mind war. And many children are becoming casualties because the parents are not being awake and intentional enough to shield their children and guide them down the right path.
Your book, though, is not just a historical overview of this problem. It also, to my surprise, contains quite a bit of very specific advice to parents and families. And that advice involves things like, what can we do to make our kids more independent minded, more independent in terms of their ability to support themselves? How can we convey that to them? And likewise, you talk about various things that can be done to strengthen the family bond, to make these institutions stronger. I wonder if you might share some of each of those.
Yeah, sure. I think it's important. I tend to get really theoretical very easily or very abstract and talk about ideas, concepts. But what I found over the years, especially with Tuttle Twins, people like it to be simple. They like it to be practical. And so in some of my past books, I've had these portions where I'm like, here's some advice, here's some tips. And readers have responded very well to that. So I thought, okay, let's do that here. If we're talking about this big threat, if we're talking about the state's omnipotence and how families need to be the first line of resistance, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be the first line of resistance? And so I want to make sure that we go through and give some examples of that so that parents can have, I don't know, a little bit of homework, you might say, or something that they can walk away from reading the book and say, oh, it's a huge problem. What do I do? Oh, here are some things I can do. For example, just demonstrating critical thinking, showing your kids around the dinner table, or you're watching the news at night or reading a tweet or whatever, and taking the time to say, hey, kids, come here. I want you to understand something. I just read this. And a lot of people will just read the headline and believe it. And that's a big problem in our society, where people just assume that what they read is true. But do you think every person tells the truth? Well, no. Do you think the government ever wants you to believe something that's wrong or incorrect? Well, yeah, maybe, and asking them these questions and saying, okay, let me show you how I try and react. When I read this, I paused and I asked myself, what source is this coming from? Are other people confirming this, or is this just the one person claiming this to be true? Have I read the article rather than just the headline? When I read the article, do I feel like it was balanced and showed different views, or do I feel like the author was pushing one particular view? So just kind of that simple process of taking some time with your kids and demonstrating how critical thinking works is so important, and so few parents do it. Even the parents that prioritize critical thinking as a primary objective of education often fail to kind of hold their kids' hand and show them the path towards critical thinking. I don't know if they assume the schools are doing it or if they're just going to learn it through osmosis or something. Another thing I focus on in the book in terms of helping parents think through what they can do with their kids is to identify what objective truths are. Like this whole mind war I'm talking about, I feel like there is a war on truth. And now it's not what is the truth, it's you speak your truth, I'll speak mine. It's this very subjective interpretation of reality where anything goes, and we lose these moorings of our society where we have this shared sense of what is true. And so helping parents say, like, okay, go through with your children different examples of what an objective truth is, why it's important to understand that something is true. I talk in the book about how, like the Gandhi quote, my mom would share this all the time when I was a kid, be the change you wish to see in the world. Turns out that's kind of an apocryphal quote. He didn't quite say it that way, but it's like you can't believe everything you read on the internet, I guess. But it's a good quote. And it's very apt for something like this because we all see the problem. We all recognize that there's all these big societal problems swirling around. What do I do? Well, start small. Start in your community. Do a little service project with your kids. Let them see you being part of a solution. Let them not see you as just a complainer, someone who throws their hands up in the air. So much of this is, are we modeling the right behaviors for our kids? And I get that we're busy, and I get that it's one more thing, but these don't have to be big, grandiose things. They can be small. right? I think by small and simple things, you can accomplish great big things, but we just have to start. And so I wanted to make sure that as we go through in the book, there is very much this practical advice just to say, I want you to come away and whatever resonates with you, whatever your family feels that you can most work on, here's some ideas to get you started. By no means is it the end all be all solution to these problems. Really, it's a conversation starter to say, here's the problem, here's some ideas to help. Let's just use these ideas as a vehicle to get you thinking, get you figuring out what this means for your family. But again, it all boils down to intentionality. If we are not having these discussions at the dinner table, then I think our country is lost. I don't think we save our country at the Capitol. I don't think we save it at the courtroom, even though through Libertas, we're engaged in battles in both of those environments. I think our country is saved at the dinner table, in living rooms across the country where parents and kids are sitting down and having these intentional, frank, relevant, meaningful discussions. And parents need to reclaim that. They need to realize that dinner time or social time or bonding time is so critical to make sure that you are empowering your children to go out into the world and have a little bit of a shield so they're not just soaking up like a sponge all the crap that they're going to hear.
What about people who say it's really rich for old Connor Boyack here to complain that there's indoctrination going on when he himself is the publisher of an ideological children's book series that involves books dealing with some topics as abstruse as central banking or U.S. foreign policy, topics of this sort, economics and markets. Why can't you, Connor Boyack, just let children be children? Why do you have to introduce the political into the life of the child? I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Oh, no, this is good. I used to shy away from this criticism. I used to be worried about it, defend against it. Now I lean into it. It boils down to this. What is indoctrination? Yes, there's the pejorative sense where the teacher closes the door and without parents knowing what is being taught, they're just going to use their captive audience as an opportunity to effectively brainwash the kids. That is the sense in which we typically use the term indoctrination. But I think there's a positive or perhaps even a neutral definition, and that is just indoctrination is teaching doctrine. It is conveying ideas that one believes to be true to another group of people. And so everybody indoctrinates. I mean, everyone is sharing their belief system as the right one. When you take your kids to Sunday school or you're scrolling through an influencer on TikTok or whatever, everyone is indoctrinating, sharing and shaping their worldview. And so to me, with our Tuttle Twins work, it becomes this idea of, well, everyone else is doing it. Your kids are going to get exposed to some type of worldview that helps explain whether capitalism is good or evil, or whether hard work should be rewarded or avoided, or these ideas are swirling out there. Your kids are going to get exposed to them. Why wouldn't you be intentional about sharing with your kids the ideas that you believe? Most religious families will take their kids to Sunday school or do Bible study or whatever, and no one questions their right to do so or the importance of doing so for them to transmit their religious beliefs to their kids. We simply take that same concept and extend it into the political and economic realm. That I believe there are certain truths of the way the world works, the way societies are best organized to be safe and successful and thrive. And so why wouldn't I, if I understand these things to be true, or at least believe them to be true, why would I not, as a parent, just like I do in a religious sense, sit down with my kids and say, hey, I want you to understand these ideas because there's a lot of other ideas out there. And sure, you'll get exposed to them. Maybe you'll be enticed by some of them, but I want you to critically think about them. You'll figure out what you believe, and that's fine. But I need to give you a foundation so that as you go out into the world, you can kind of challenge these ideas and figure things out rather than just accept them to be true because of the authority figure or whoever who tells you that. So it's all indoctrination. Everything is. It's just a matter of where your kids are going to get exposed to ideas and by whom. And so I want to be a good parent. And so I'm going to lean into that and say, I want to teach my kids truth as I understand it, and then send them out into the world so they can figure things out for themselves.
Here's the way I look at it. I agree with everything you just said. In fact, I'm glad. I was afraid I was going to have to nudge you into this answer. But I think that is the correct way to look at it. I think about it this way. I think it's bad for somebody to get caught up in bad, harmful, or false ideas. I think that's bad for the person. It's not just bad for society. It's bad for them. If I believe something that's false, that's the opposite of human flourishing. Human flourishing is intimately tied to the truth. And so given that my children matter to me as much as anybody else's children matter to them. Why would I want them to fall into something that's bad for them? It's bad for them. Now, it's true. If they were to disagree with me and say, I actually don't think your ideas are the correct ones. Okay, fair enough. We can have a conversation. I'm not going to require them to agree with me, but I at least want to give the ideas that I believe in a seat at the table, because in the general society, they don't have a seat at the table. And unless I intervene and introduce them, chances are my kids would not have been exposed to them on their own. And so, moreover, everybody teaches their kids right and wrong. Everybody. Hey, don't hit that other kid. Well, right away, you're, quote, indoctrinating them into a certain moral system.
Right.
You're right away saying that nihilism is wrong. You're right away saying that might makes right is wrong. So everybody does that. And not to mention, I bet some of the people criticizing you are badgering their kids about recycling that bottle or wearing a mask or listening to certain state-approved authorities. All those propositions are highly debatable, to say the least, but they think nothing of it.
Tom, let me add an exclamation point to what you just said and extend it further beyond our own family. When you and I did an interview for your School of Life program, I talked about this a little bit, why marketing is so essential to convey these ideas, because what you just said applies not just to my kids or just to your kids. I think these ideas are good for humanity. And so I feel compelled to do everything I can to learn marketing tactics and the art of persuasion and encourage people to buy these books and read these books with their kids, because I know that they teach truth. I know the good that they can do. And so I feel this kind of moral imperative, not just with my own children, but to go out and figure out, okay, if I believe these ideas are so good, then, I need to not just keep them confined to conversations with my kids. I need to figure out how I can spread them across the world.
No kidding. So the book is Children of the Collective. No subtitle, because Connor is defying the
renegade
publishing collective, which insists that you have an unnecessary subtitle. I like the cover design. I love the cover design. The kids with the individual faces blurred out because they're part of the Borg. And we want to unblur those faces and make them all individuals again and not caught into this Borg that we contend with day in and day out, that insists we view current events through a particular lens, that we think a certain way, that we shun certain people, that we ignore certain ideas. We got to just break out of that. And the best way to do that is by means of families very deliberately explaining to their kids what's really going on in the world and giving them an alternative. So what you're doing is, in its own good, non-destructive and non-genocidal way, revolutionary. So to you, Connor, my thanks. The book will be linked, of course, on our show notes page. And let me see if I can remember. I got the notes here. 2286. That's the episode number.
2286. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, what am I trying to prove at this point?
Trying to hit 5 digits, right? 10,000, then you'll retire.
Oh, gosh. I remember Peter Schiff said at my 1000th episode, he had a testimonial that he phoned in, and he said, I'm just waiting to see how long it takes you to hit 10,000. I think I did the math on it once, and it is conceivable within a human lifetime that I could do it. I don't know that I want to. We'll see. Anyway, check out tomwoods.com/2286 and pick up a copy of Connor Boyack's book, which is Children of the Collective. Thanks so much, Connor.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.